Now, here's where I'm going to take and differ from the rest of the process. Many people will now take and stick a sugar cube into the drink. I'm not going to use a sugar cube. I'm instead going to use simple syrup because sugar, like we've already covered on several other episodes, doesn't dissolve well. So I'm just going to put a dollop of simple syrup, eyeballing it on the bottom of the glass because I'm comfortable with this glass. I've used it quite often. The bartender or the owner from Milk and Honey in New York, he prefers using sugar cubes because he says the sugar cube is a perfect measurement of sugar, where it's really hard to get that same level of perfection out of simple syrup, and Sasha is all about perfection in his cocktails. I then added some bitters into that drink, which is an extremely important ingredient in any cocktail. You should never leave this out of an old-fashioned or a Manhattan or a champagne cocktail or, as we've seen, a martini. But bitters is extremely important. It adds a spiciness to it. Now here's another place where things start going a bit different. This is where you'd see a bartender stick an orange wheel, a half an orange wheel, and a maraschino cherry, maraschino being the artificial maraschino cherry, into this drink. I don't like doing that. For one thing, on the cherry, all the cherry does when you're muddling the cherry in the drink is it leaves a carcass in the bottom of the drink. It doesn't add anything to it flavor-wise, I don't think, at all, because it's just simple syrup, essentially, with a little bit of almond flavoring on it, and I don't think that is really appropriate to the drink. Orange, on the other hand, I think works really well with bourbon. And while the original garnish for an old-fashioned was a wedge of lemon, and orange wasn't even part of it at all, the cherry and the orange came in the mid-1900s. I like the flavor of orange in this, and so I'm going to add that later, but not at the beginning, because at the beginning, if I were to muddle it here, we'd have bits of fruit in there, and that's going to plug up the straw, which I don't like doing. So now we're going to take and actually add the ice. I'm just going to half fill the glass with ice. I'm now going to take a small stir rod and stir it up. This is starting the ice to melt a bit, mixing the bitter and the sugar. Allow that to blend easier. Now I'm going to take my orange, and I'm going to take and using a vegetable peeler rather than a channel knife or regular knife, I'm just going to take and, while holding it over top of the old-fashioned glass and the ice, take off a big chunk of orange peel. This would have expressed some of the oils into the drink. Now I'm just going to take and trim up the orange peel by cutting off the rough edges. And now I'm going to squeeze this over top just to get some of those orange oils into the drink. It's also going to get some of the orange oils onto the outside of the skin, which I think are really nice. And then I'm going to add that into the glass. I'm now going to take and measure off 2 ounces of bourbon whiskey. You can make this with rye whiskey as well. I'm going to pour that over top of this ice that has already had some of the orange oils onto it. And now I'm going to add a little bit more ice. Stir again briefly. The importance here is I want some of the ice to actually melt and get into the glass so that it softens up the flavor of the whiskey a little bit. Now again, here's where a lot of bartenders would also differ. Once they'd started making the old-fashioned, almost finish it, they'd basically now take some soda and pop that off on the top of it just to make sure the glass was filled up to the top. Soda should never be part of an old-fashioned, and you should never top the drink off with soda or water. If you're going to put any water into the drink, that's only if you're using sugar, because what you're trying to do is make a sugar syrup at the very beginning as you're muddling it. And so you add just as much water as you do sugar, never any more than that. Since I use simple syrup instead of sugar, the simple syrup had the pre-mixed water into it, so I never need to add any water whatsoever. I now take and add a couple of straws, and then here's where I think the cherry comes in. I'll garnish the drink with a cherry because I think it looks so much nicer unmolested on the top of the drink rather than battered to a pulp in the bottom. And there's the old-fashioned cocktail.